Welcome back to MythVision Podcast. I'm your host, Derek Lambert. Today, I have Natalia Reagan, who actually is going to take us into evolution. Who knows where this conversation might go? And just to introduce her to you here at MythVision, Natalia Reagan is an anthropologist, primatologist, comedian, host, producer, podcaster, professor, writer, frequent animal expert, and monkey-chasing weirdo. Those are her words. Her training was in a four-field approach to anthropology, and she often examines topics through a biocultural lens. Natalia was a comedy writer and correspondent on Neil deGrasse Tyson's Star Talk, regular host of the Star Talk All-Stars podcast, a science correspondent on Thrillist Daily Hit, a science expert on History's Unexplained, and much, much more. This was the abbreviated bio. Welcome to MythVision.
Thank you so much for having me, Derek. I'm very excited. And I'm so sorry to make you read all of that.
No. I'm glad that we're introducing you to the audience. I think that we should roll the red carpet out for you. You talk about a lot of stuff. Some of that stuff gets, I almost feel like, blacklisted, or even they don't want to hear. They don't want you to put it on their programs, whether it be Instagram. They're not wanting to monetize or whatever. You know how these places can be.
Spicy.
It's super spicy, and I've been encouraging her to start up something where she's able to do that and people can sign up and go and check it out themselves. So you know a little bit about evolution, I imagine.
I know a fair share. I used to teach biological anthropology at a few different institutions in New York, Kentucky, and here in Los Angeles.
So you know a little bit.
I know it, and I'm actually going to be going to Galapagos in February, where Charles Darwin he took that voyage on the Beagle many moons ago, and that's when he discovered or figured out evolution by natural selection, and then eventually wrote on the origin of species, and then eventually published it in 1859. So shout out to Darwin for that.
Yeah. You know, I'm just going to give you a little bit of tidbit here, because you may not know this, and our audience does, I'm sure, is that I thought evolution was BS. I thought it was possibly Satan's plan to try and trick people to not believe the gospel. And it was one of those things, as I was starting to exit Christianity from my own perspective, that I started taking science serious from experts in their field, their respective fields. And I even interviewed I believe she's working on becoming a primatologist, Gutsit Gibbon, Erica.
Yeah. She's great.
I asked her, I was like, listen, if we evolved from monkeys, then how come there's monkeys?
Yep.
And she tackled it.
Common question.
How would you answer that question?
I would say, well, we don't come from monkeys. We have a common ancestor with monkeys, as we do with apes, as we do with a lot of different animals out there. There's a common ancestor, and they go on their own evolutionary trajectory, and we go on ours. So in the case of monkeys, depending on, we're talking about those in the old world, Africa and Asia, or those in the new world, there would be a different time line, 40 million years, 20 million years. Let's just give an example for our closest genetic relatives, chimpanzees and bonobos. Those are our closest great ape relatives, and we share a common ancestor with them roughly 6 million years ago. So that's why they still exist, right? Think of them as like cousins, right? So if we share if you and your cousin have grandparents, then why do you still have cousins? I mean, they're our grandparents. So we have these grandparents with chimpanzees and bonobos, and we went on our evolutionary trajectory and they went on theirs. And in fact, the ancestors of chimpanzees and bonobos actually split off 2 million years ago at the formation of the Congo River system. And then chimps were on one side, bonobos on the other. And they have also very different social structures and behaviors because the environment shapes a lot of who we are. And so, but that's an example of, again, we don't come from monkeys and apes. We share a common ancestor.
This is interesting. I love learning about our past. I do it through the literature, though, often, and you're doing it through a completely different avenue. And if the viewer, let's say, is open-minded to learning, but they've never really paid attention in science class in school, or they may be curious to hear how someone might explain that we know we evolved, where would you personally start? Because I know that anyone can really start wherever they are. If it's a geneticist, they might start dealing with gene codes or going into a different avenue, but your specialty, in what way would you say we know we evolved?
Okay, well, there's two very excellent examples of evolution. One that's so in our face. COVID is a great example because we're watching a virus evolve very quickly. We've seen COVID go through many strains, Delta, Omicron, so on and so forth. And we're seeing it kind of outrun our desire to vaccinate against it, right? Another great example are things like antibiotic-resistant bacteria, gonorrhea. Hate to say it, but the clap, not the applause you're looking for, but the applause you might get if you don't use protection. And right now we have antibiotic-resistant gonorrhea that has actually evolved in multiple ways to outrun antibiotics. And that is a way that we can see right now in present time evolution in action. We see it in hybrids. Like, for instance, we have a lot of climate change. I don't know, maybe your viewers are not hip or quote unquote believe climate change, but we do have climate change that has been anthropogenic. Basically, humans are causing the climate change through our greenhouse emissions. But we're seeing a lot of species that are now, instead of having access to their own species, they're having to mate with other species that are closely related. And so we're seeing hybridization. And that is an example of, seeing new species come into play. And so we're seeing that happen in real time right in front of us. And so those are great examples, I think, for folks that are like, okay, but I want to see something right this second.
Right.
Because the fossil record, we can only see so much, and soft tissue doesn't preserve. So we do have ancient DNA, so we can understand that, like, for instance, for a long time, there were two different camps in the biological anthropology world that thought humans and Neanderthals would never have mated. We knew that they lived alongside each other because we had, fossil evidence of these two different species living in Europe and the Middle East at the same time. But there were two camps, one that thought we would never, ever, ever, ever get down with those chinless freaks because, spoiler alert, humans are the only species with a chin. So keep your chin up. You got one. And then there were those that were like, are you kidding? Humans will have sex with anything. In fact, I went to a talk years ago that was one of the best talks I've ever been to. I forget his full name, but he went through all the different animate and inanimate objects humans have tried to have sex with, and it was hilarious. But the point was, like, it was like a mailbox, an apple pie, a sheep, you know what I mean? It was just this whole list of things that humans have been caught trying to copulate with. So why wouldn't we copulate with something or someone, because Neanderthals were human, that looked almost identical to us? Minus, the lack of chin. So, and now with ancient DNA, we know that we most definitely did get down with those chinless freaks because we do have some people in, modern day humans that have Neanderthal in their genome. We also know that we got down with Denisovans, another Pleistocene species in the genus Homo, and some other ghost lineages, which is really fascinating. We have DNA that we don't have skeletal remains for, but we have this interesting lineage, ghost DNA that's in some genomes that are proof that humans were also getting down with other species in the genus Homo during the Pleistocene. So it was a very freaky deaky time. That's actually, if I were to be able to get a time machine, I'd want to go back to the Pleistocene and kind of, just be a fly on the wall. Who's getting down with who,
It's interesting you bring up Neanderthal. I saw some podcast. It was not too long ago on why we, I guess you'd say, outlived the Neanderthal. And the gentleman, I cannot remember his name, was pretty much trying to make the case that Neanderthals, unlike us, did not form larger than like 50 people social groups because they didn't have a common myth or story that they potentially language may have played a role in that development of being able to have a cohesive group larger than 50. And we see this how they form armies and empires and, over time to more modern periods, or at least since writing came on the scene, we know about kingdoms and large groups of Homo sapiens that are together. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on how they went extinct and what happened. Did we kill them off?
Well, there's a lot of different theories. And again, we can't really know for sure at this point, and we might not ever know. And that's kind of, and there could have been multiple factors that played a role, right? It's not necessarily like, oh, it was only one thing. One of the really interesting ideas is that dog domestication by humans could have helped us in terms of out competing with Neanderthals, because having, man's best friend, which would have been very closely related, basically a domesticated wolf. We're not talking, I have a pug. We're not talking a pug. We're talking more like a wolf dog. Having a wolf dog help you hunt or help protect you against other predators can be really helpful. Dr. Pat Shipman, who's a biological anthropologist, wrote a book about this. Also, just the idea of, and communication and language is a great point, but again, we don't have any evidence that they did or did not speak. There's a wonderful video that if your viewers want to watch, if you Google BBC Neanderthal talking. I loved showing this in my anthropology classes because it supposes what would a Neanderthal sound like, because speech is closely related to the hyoid bone, and the shape of the hyoid bone would directly affect how your voice would sound. And this particular video supposes that Neanderthals would have kind of a higher, more nasally voice, but they're barrel chested. They have these big barrel chests, so they probably would have been really loud. So it's one of the funniest videos because you can tell, and it's BBC, so it's British, and the guy, the actor, as you can tell, he's like probably a real Shakespearean actor, and he's like, 1, 2, 3. It's the funniest thing I've ever seen. I can't. I'm sorry to have butchered it, because seriously, Google it. It's good. But they, sort of, what would they sound like if they did speak? As far as how sophisticated there are again, just like how I mentioned, there were two camps of those who thought we definitely got down with them, and those that were like, there's no way. There are those that believe that they were more sophisticated than previously given credit for, whether it's having actual art on the walls. There are some caves that are associated with Neanderthal occupation that have these sort of hands on the wall done with red ochre. I believe it's red ochre. And I made a joke years ago that they're like hand turkeys. They're just a bunch of hands on the wall. But that's an example of potential symbolic art. There's also one site in Krapina Cave where they found their eagle talons, and they think it was part of a necklace. So I joked that not only were they making jewelry, they were making like the most metal jewelry out there, like eagle talons, So there are examples of them being a bit more sophisticated. There are evidence of burials, which is a sign that they, not only, we know that they cared for their sick and injured because, this was one of my favorite stats. They found that at one site, the injuries to Neanderthals were consistent with rodeo clowns. So they were probably attacking or trying to take down big megafauna. Think maybe a woolly rhino, a woolly mammoth, but they were probably getting tossed around and getting their butts handed to them, right? And those individuals healed, right? And so one of the things that we can look at in the fossil record is that when we see an individual that broke a bone that would maybe had limited its ability to walk or just take care of itself, and they survived past that, that means somebody cared for that individual, if not the whole group, right? And so that's a sign that they were also taking care of their sick and injured, but they also buried them with grave goods. So that's a sign that also they potentially, we don't want to surmise that they were believing in an afterlife. That's a big leap again, but they were at least sending their dead off with a little something. But as far as like state level or, bigger groups, the good news and bad news with bigger groups is bigger groups can mean disease transmission, as we know, right? Mm-hmm. So if you have a disease that shows up in a smaller group, it can burn through real quickly and then just kind of peter out, right? But when you have a really big group, it has a chance to not burn out. It evolves. It will, stick around for a while. That's why the plague was so absolutely devastating. I think it killed 20% of European population at one point, So yeah, there are upsides and downsides to having a state level society, but I think it's probably a combination of maybe being out competed when it comes to Neanderthals not lasting as long as Homo sapiens, whether it's dog domestication or just a better way of hunting, better tool industry, because we also look at tool industries when we look at our ancestors. There's the Australian, and then there's also the Mousterian tools, the Chatel-Perion. I'm probably butchering. I'm not an archaeologist, so forgive me, archaeologists that are like, oh, you butchered that word, but there's different. Yeah. that are a bit more sophisticated, that might have helped humans survive into future generations. But there are some also benefits to mixing with Neanderthals, because we also absorbed their offspring, like a Neanderthal and an anatomically modern human that, got down. Their offspring would have absorbed some of those Neanderthal traits, because remember, Neanderthals had been living in Europe in colder regions for a much longer time than their anatomically modern human relatives, right? They came out of Africa into Europe and were like, oh, wow, we forgot to bring a coat. This is cold, So there are, traits that would have maybe helped them, do well in the cold weather. Some traits that I forget the particular, I'm wading into not my specialty territory, but there was
we're not judging you.
No, but I always want to get everything absolutely right. But there was a particular allele that they, I think, inherited from Neanderthals that helped with in terms of boosting immunity. So again, there's and this is why it's hilarious. Well, when I say hilarious, I mean more tragically so when we talk about eugenics, or we talk about white supremacy in Nazi Germany.
Oh, yeah.
This whole idea of wanting this like pure race. It's like, hello, hybrid vigor. You know what I mean?
So I do know what you mean.
Yeah. There's nothing good about this pure. No. And first of all, there's no such thing as that. But in fact, when a species begins, there's this thing called founder's effect, and there's more genetic diversity in the beginning of a species. And then as it spreads out over time and space, the diversity dwindles down. And our own species, where humans are at the core of it across the globe, we're 99.9% genetically identical. So this idea of like, oh, races are biologically different. No, they're not.
That is such a good myth to debunk, especially with the existing ideologies that are around all the time. Yeah, this is good.
Yeah, there's no biological basis to racial classification. Especially when we look at the different things we looked at in the past to determine, racial disparity. Like skin color is a great example, and within somebody's how they identify racially, the skin color can absolutely span the gamut, right? And there's people that might identify as black and Korean and be almost identical in color, right? Because there's a gradient. And so it's not necessarily the best proxy for determining things like race. It's the easiest, right? Because it's what you're looking at it. But at the same time, it's not always the most accurate. So again, but in biologically, there, it is a social construct. That doesn't mean it's not real. It's real in terms of a social construct. But that's the thing that is frustrating. That when people I would highly recommend. There's a great TED Talk by Dorothy Roberts who talks about race-based medicine and how dangerous it is when doctors try to, and sometimes, there are reasons for looking at race when it comes to one's, health and looking at their, maybe it's more important to look at their family history rather than their actual race itself, because a lot of the things that they might be looking at and attributing to race might be like socioeconomic background, where they particularly grew up. If you grew up in a food desert, you're going to have, probably higher rates of diabetes and heart disease because you're eating food that's not fresh and filled with preservatives. And, so there's, it's complicated. And some people try to oversimplify.
I watched a Netflix video. It was like a show series where they are showing like 2 million years ago. They found a cave. I'm butchering this as I start, but you probably don't know about it. They found a cave system where.
Oh, is this Rising Star?
I think so. Like they go way in, and then there's this actual very skinny passage down where they buried a kid, and there's like inscriptions on the wall. It looks like.
So that is a little complicated. So it's about 300,000 years. That's Homo naledi. Yeah, that's okay. So dare I say, controversial in my field, because that special came out. I believe it's called Cave of Secrets, and it's about the rising star cave system in South Africa. It's fascinating, and Homo naledi is a huge discovery. I do not want to take away or detract from that at all. It is fascinating, the work that Lee Berger and his team have done. I don't know. Basically, I'll kind of give you the story because it's one of my favorite stories, and it all begins with a Facebook post. So essentially, back in 2013, two cavers they're big on caving in South Africa, very skinny men, went down into this cave, and they kind of got shimmied on through this system and got down to this one cave, and they went even deeper down into another cave, and they found remnants, bones, fossils that they were like, wait a minute, this looks like this could be something. And I believe they took photos and their camera broke, and their batteries died or something, so they had to go back and do it again. But they got the photos to Lee Berger, who, upon seeing them, knew that this was a huge find, that this was a hominin. And just to tell you how fortunate Lee Berger is, a few years earlier in 2008, his son Matthew Berger, who I've since I know now, he's at USC working in getting a film degree, I believe. They were walking along in South Africa, and he discovered a skull, his son did, of a whole different species. So he's already had great success, and that was Australopithecus sediba. So I already discovered that, and now he's got this cave system with these bones, and he's like, okay, we need to do a dig. We need to get these up, but the cave system was so narrow. He needed specifically a specific size that could get through this little tiny opening. I believe it was I'm gonna butcher this, maybe 10, 12 inches, that they had to get real skinny, real small. I could never. I'm way too much of a robust hominin, and so they needed very skinny, basically spelunkers that could do this expedition that had maybe archaeological or paleoanthropology background. And a bunch of people submitted and applied, and it ended up being a team of all female researchers that went down, and they called them, and they were awesome. I know a few of them. I respect them because I could never, right? I mean, we were talking about, before we got into this, about being claustrophobic at Disneyland because of crowds. Imagine being in this tiny cave not all day, because I think they did shifts and things, but still this tiny little cave that, at any moment, if something goes wrong, exactly, you're buried alive. And so these 5 women did this expedition. They called them the underground astronauts because they filmed the whole thing. And they ended up bringing up what was a new species, Homo naledi. And when they dated it, it's actually around 300,000 years old, which would make them contemporaries with humans. Because anatomically modern humans, our age varies anywhere between 250 and 300,000 years young. We're very young species, really. So, but what was crazy about Homo naledi is their brain size, very small, not very big. So it was like, wait a minute, this is strange. And this is why, by the way, for those watching, the line of human evolution, that line that you see where it's like the ape slowly standing up, and then if it's a funny thing, then it's getting back down because it's on a computer. But that line, that supposes that, human evolution is this this linear trajectory. It's this chain, right? And you're looking for a missing link. No. Evolution is this big brambly bush that's all over the place, because now we know that there were species that lived alongside us that had smaller brains, that had different limb proportions, that still were upright walking hominins. You know what I mean? So we're finding more and more out that it's more of a bush than it is this line. But anyways, so that discovery, and there was talk when that first happened that they could have buried their dead, but that would have meant going into a weird tiny little crevasse, knowing that this thing exists, and then burying them. And so that particular Netflix special came out at a time before the paper came out that was to be peer reviewed. So I had some issues with some of the things that were said in the video or in the film, including there was kind of a jumping to conclusions when they saw what appeared to be black soil was like, oh, a fire. And it's like, well, unless you test that, you don't know if that's remnants of a fire, because magnesium in soil can also be very dark. There's a skull called Black Skull. This is Paranthropus ethiopicus. I printed it with black PLA filament on a 3D printer, but the skull itself, it's called Black Skull because it was very, very dark. And that's because the manganese in the soil, or magnesium, in the soil. So anyways, there was a lot of assumptions in that film that, I'm all about let's see and test and do the peer reviewed, review of the paper, that I think there was some jumping to conclusions that they might be more sophisticated than they really were. I don't know exactly where the jury stands with all the paleoanthros, but there was a lot of controversies when that came out about making some pretty big assumptions, because in science, that's where the religion and science become fuzzy, right? You know what I mean? With science, you want to do rigorous testing.
Right.
Let's not assume. Whereas in religion, there's a lot of like, well, yeah, I mean, yeah, sure, he turned water into wine, cool, burning bush seems totally logical, I mean, and the myths, they're myths in some ways and parables. Right. So it's like there's room for creative license, but with science there shouldn't be as much. So that's why that particular film was a little frustrating for the biological.
I felt that way watching it, and not saying that it wasn't good and that, but one of the jumps in that, and I think we're talking about the same one, unless they did more than one on the same.
No, it's the same one.
But they found what they thought was it was like a child's bones, and they found a rock that seemed more like a tool, like a sharp tool, and they like buried this useful sharp tool with this assumption being that was that little kid's tool, or at least some parent gave it to the kid, and they buried it with him so that wherever they go, now this is where you get into like philosophy and religion a little, like they wouldn't have buried this if they weren't assuming they're going to a place to use the tool, kind of like we have afterlife ideas and stuff. I thought that was kind of cool because whether it's true or not, I didn't know whether or not peer-reviewed scientists are saying that was a tool or not. What does the consensus say about this anymore? But one of the reasons I thought, okay, that's really interesting, that if there was some proto model of understanding that people, when they die, they thought after they're dead, they're still somewhere. And it made me think there might be something to that. Like we should be open to something like that. And the reason I think that, not saying that they really are there, it's just that humans, like one of the more common things when someone's loved one is gone is that they hear them or they feel them or they experience them when they're gone, and they're gone. They're gone. So they go to the doctors and they talk to them about their post-traumatic stress of losing a loved one and things. And that's very common. So I wonder naturally if these hominid species thought they're still around somehow, they're still experiencing something, I just can't see them here. And now that they're buried, and we see, it makes me think maybe there's something to it, but I don't know what the jury is on what you're describing here.
And I apologize because I haven't stayed up on this as much, as it's not my focus. I mean, I was very much, watching in the wings going, oh, okay. Because I saw the film and these are people I know and I respect, so I don't want to, I'm not a big shit talker generally. That's not how I do. And I do respect them very much as academics, but I felt like it was a bit of a leap. And I think other people were feeling that too, especially when it was the demonstrating how they would have gotten and buried in their offspring or their kids in it. I was like, who would do that? Who in their right mind? Because they're like, they would be carrying torches down through this tiny pass. And I was like, why would you do that? But
I was going to say, like, I thought when they were doing that, explaining that, and sorry to interrupt, this is all forgetted if I don't. What you just said is so important, because I thought, here's their loved one they cherish and value so much, which anyone does today. Yeah. And they're taking them through this small little chimney of a hole. And how do they get them down? I thought they're probably not using ropes. They just drop the dead body. And I'm thinking how they must have not, I can't imagine how they would have handled it down through that hole, that drop.
That was I watched it, and that was my thought was and I know a lot of anthros also had that thought as well, that this seems a little presumptuous and far-fetched. But, again, I try, it's hard because, there's a point of becoming an academic and working in this field that you still feel like an imposter sometimes, where you're just like, well, they're older than me, they should know, and this and that. But sometimes you realize, no, your concerns are valid, and this is very far-fetched, and so, and same with the markings on the wall. It's easy to, I think, just like believing in Bigfoot, people want to believe. We're very romantic, and there is, and I talk about this when I teach, that when we look at speciation, there are folks that are lumpers and splitters. And let me explain. Lumpers are those that are like, well, okay, this species looks like it's in the variation of Homo habilis. Let's just lump it in with them. And then there's those that are like, oh, well, this one actually has this individual has a pretty big brain compared to Homo habilis. I think it's its own species. Let's call it Homo rudolfensis. And that right there would be splitting off, right? And there are those that, because if you look at all the hominins that have been sort of written about, there are more than the ones that we really teach about in class, because they are those that have split off and then later on they get lumped in, or we're not 100% sure, because what it is there is money, there is fame, there are accolades that come with discovering a new species. And it's not just that, but also, and by the way, Homo naledi is 100% a new species. I'm not saying that, but when you discover something, a novel behavior, there is some excitement there, right? We just have to be careful to not jump to conclusions, right? And that, I think, is where with Homo naledi, I think a lot of people are like, okay, it is fascinating that there is a species that lived, 300,000 years ago that had a brain size this small, that, and was built the way they were compared to anatomically modern humans. We also know that we had the Hobbit, Homo floresiensis. I always biff that name up, but Homo floresiensis lived in Indonesia on the island of Flores. They had a very small cranial capacity. For a long time, there were actually two camps in biological anthropology. And I remember being at the meeting where they were arguing about this. There were two camps about the Hobbit. One that thought that they were a small group, a community that had microcephaly. So, remember Zika, when the babies were born and they had very small brains and very small heads. So like a group like that. And then there were others saying that, no, this was a new species. And what has won out is it's a new species, which is cool. It's crazy cool, because that means during the Pleistocene, contemporaries of humans were these small, short-statured humans, because they're humans. They're in the genus Homo, with these small little heads, and they seem to have, a tool industry and did okay. And they weren't necessarily building kingdoms and things like this, but this is 30 some odd thousand years ago. So, but still, we're constantly digging up new treasure, you know what I mean? And by treasure, I mean fossils. And I think, we're going to continue to do that. The discovery of Lucy was, oh my God, it's 50 years ago this year that Australopithecus afarensis, or Lucy, this is a afarensis kind of composite skull, so a lot of different versions put into here. This one, though, I think feels like the canines are a little big, but anyways, it was 50 years ago that Don Johansson and his team in Hadar, Ethiopia, discovered Lucy. And since then, there have been so many discoveries. So that's the kind of exciting thing, right? Is we keep discovering new species that are, and also like new species living alongside other species at the exact same time. And you're just like, how did these, like, hold on, Boisei and Homo habilis were contemporaries. You know what I mean? Like, it's kind of crazy. You know what I mean? And they lived at the same time. Like, how did they get along with each other? Were they just like, sup? Or were they like, fuck you, I'm gonna get you? I actually just interviewed Brianna Pobiner and Michael Ponte. Brianna Pobiner is at the Smithsonian. Michael Ponte is at, oh my God, Colorado State. Is that the one in Fort Collins?
Forgive her.
Yeah, forgive me if I got it wrong. I just interviewed them about the potential first evidence of cannibalism in our ancestry. About 1.45 million years ago. But this is the deal. There were 3 different species living in this area at that time. And we're looking just at a tibia bone. So we don't know 100% sure which species that tibia bone belonged to. But they found, and it's something that they found in the 70s, right? Brianna Pobiner is a big believer of going back and looking at old fossils that have been discovered with fresh eyes. Because she was like, wait a minute. These look like not bite marks, but cut marks. So she went back and looked at them, I guess scanned them, and had Michael Ponte look at the marks and was like, oh no, this looks like, these look like cut marks. So, again, what's interesting is, sort of the semantics. To be considered cannibalism, they have to be of the same species, but because it's going to be so difficult to determine what species it was and what species might have done that, we'll never quite know. But it's still pretty interesting that it could have been, 2 different hominins eating each other. It could have been the same hominin. It could have been, maybe this is an individual that died, and so they're defleshing it, for some sort of ritual. Who knows? Like there's so many different options that you could kind of go with. But yeah, it's really fascinating.
I love learning all of this stuff that you're describing. And one of the things you do a lot is talk about sex in evolution. I mean, like you get into various hominids and modern chimpanzees, apes. You're looking at various groups today and how they behave, what they do, how their patterns are, their sexual activity, and things like that. And something I want to bring it kind of back to kind of the MythVision base of someone who was coming out of religion. And in many of the people who give their kind of exiting Christianity interview with me and how they ended up going, not always, but sex gets brought up in some way, shape, or form as a prevalent or important part and aspect of their journey. It seems that the religion that I was taught, the way that I was taught it, made it a bad thing, right? Sex is a bad thing. You can read church fathers who just, the woman is literally the one who made us fall, or like women can be saved only through childbirth in some of the epistles that you find in there's all sorts of different ideas that men have. The question I have for you is someone who might make the argument that, look, in nature, we find all of these aspects, from same-sex relationships to people who are interested in opening up their I guess you'd say their relationships and who they have sex with, or even the idea of sex and such. A lot of people will use nature and go, hey, this is normal. It's things we've done. But then those who want to hold their religious views over on other people will go, well, also in nature you have cannibalism, as you might describe, or that's just probably a bad example, but or they eat their young, or they kill their offspring, or they kill their, like if they're adopting a child of the family, one of them died, they kill that child instead of letting it live, or the list goes on and on. How would you navigate the morality and nature of evolution in our species pertaining to sex?
Well, I think you bring up some good points about, oh, well, if we, if you're going to bring up nature, why don't I bring up like infanticide or, sexual cannibalism and things of that sort, and a lot of those are outliers. I mean, sexual cannibalism aside, because that, if that's something built into like praying mantises and the black widow, I think we should bring that back, by the way. It might keep I'm just kidding. I do joke about that. I was like, no. But a lot of times, like infanticide does happen. Like, say, if a gorilla, generally with Western lowland gorillas or mountain gorillas, you have one male and then multiple females, sometimes two males, but one male is really the one that kind of has access to the females. And sometimes there is infanticide if a male overthrows the other gorilla and wants to kind of kickstart the women or the females being able to have more offspring, he might commit infanticide. But it's not as common, I think, as people would like to believe. Mm-hmm. So, and also, let's be real, everything that we see done in animals, humans have done in our species, right? So as far as
still do.
Yeah, it still do. No. I mean, like, that's the thing is when I did this cannibalism episode, it's I think we're going to finish recording it shortly, but I'd bring up modern day examples, with cannibalism, whether it's out of necessity, like the Donner Party, right? Or, Dahmer, we've got examples of it. So, we're not any better. And I make the argument pretty regularly when we say, oh, animals are just like us. It's like, no. We've been around 300,000 years. We are just like them. When we talk about their grief, their altruism, their jealousy, their understanding of what is fair and not fair, that is something that they have had, and we have evidence of that, whether it's corvids, non-human primates, whales, things of that sort. We see, elephants, we see attributes, characteristics that we oftentimes think of just purely human. We see them in animals, and we're really species centric, and we think we're so special.
Yeah, we're the center of the universe, right?
We really are. We're just like, we're human centric. It so drives me crazy. I actually, one of my side jobs is I work at Griffith Observatory. So, so we talk about the time when they thought that Earth was the center of the universe and the sun revolved around us. It's like, we are that in the animal world. We think everything is just like, and that's the other thing about evolution. It's not a goal-driven process. So if I could really drive anything home to folks that might be like, I don't know about evolution, I understand, because it is a lot. It's a lot, right? But it's not goal-driven. We're not humans. It's not like evolution got to us and they were like, okay, we're done. It's not like, it's setting out to a goal, right? Like, this is just, we're just along the line. There might be something after us. There might not be something after. I mean, there'll be something after us. It might just not be us anymore. But anyways, back to humans,
morality and how this. I just want to capitalize on something while we're getting into this. And as you're explaining, I don't want you to lose track, is that you're pretty much saying the morality, as far as we can even observe in contemporary animals in nature. And of course, we can see probably some aspects of this through fossil record and kind of use an analogous
Yep.
modern are doing this, then potentially antiquity is also the same way. They have what we're describing as bad things, infanticide or something to these effects, like we talk about cannibalism or whatever it might be. They also potentially saw those things as heretical or taboo, or something that was not the common, what should be practiced thing in nature. Is that kind of where you're going with it?
You mean like, will others kind of condemn their behavior, sort of thing?
Right,
Is that,
like socially, right?
socially, like one of my favorite, God, where was it? It was oh man, this was such a funny study. I need to dig this up because this would be great to cover. It was about freeloaders. It was about freeloader monkeys, and freeloader monkeys were frowned upon, which I just thought was so funny because it was like monkeys that were, I'll have to find it. I'll dig it up and I'll send it to you. But
Okay.
it was like, even they were like, come on, stop it. Right. And so one of my favorite examples, I was at the LA Zoo. I must have been 21 or 22. This is before I became a primatologist. This is when I deeply wanted to become one, but I didn't know how. And by the way, if you feel that way, folks at home, reach out to me because I can give you a path, because I was literally going, like, I was working in television going, how can I do this for a living? I still, but I was watching a gorilla named Caesar, who I loved at the zoo. And but then next to his enclosure, he was by himself because he was hand reared by humans, so he didn't want to get down with anybody. He just kind of chilled by himself. But in the enclosure next door, there was a new male named Kelly, who's now been at the LA Zoo forever, like 20. I'm 44, 45. So he's been there for over 20 something years, and he was being introduced to a group of females, and it was hilarious because, nobody would get near him. And I remember there was a female zookeeper that I was like, what's going on? And she's like, oh, this is this new guy's introduced. This is the first day. And I was like, okay, cool. And he's just like walking around, like kind of like, hey, ladies, and he walks up to a female, and everybody's kind of around the gorilla enclosure complaining that they're not doing anything because they're generally chill, right? And then he walks up to a female and he whacks her. Like, I'm telling you, it was so loud, you could hear it, I could feel it. It was one of those like, holy shit, what did he just do?
Right.
And I'm telling you, all those females ganged up on him and chased him all around. Like, they were like, nope, this is not happening, not on our watch. And so it was a great example of, sure, he was a young silverback. Silverback is just an adult male, right? He was right. Kind of like an adolescent silverback, on that line. He was still pretty young, but no, you're not going to get away with that. No, you're not. And it was really interesting. So yeah, in the animal world, there are those that maybe do bad things, or by bad things, I mean, kill, maim, and there are consequences. Sometimes there aren't as many as you would expect, and chimpanzees, they can be pretty brutal, and you don't necessarily see them being ostracized in some cases. Sometimes they're promoted, but right. At the same time, it's complicated.
It seems like the social environment or the group themselves may hold to a different perception of that particular thing. Like if we look at humans and we see how certain tribes in the past were just, I mean, even like empires. These are beyond tribe groups, but like empires, and how they were on warfare and killing and literally leaving no one behind, kind of genocidal, or even like contemporary examples, right? Like we could go, I guess what I'm getting at is like, your point is the morality code, and it's very subjective based on the environment of the group, but we learned it from our ancestors. This is something that was proto-human, proto-homo sapien. This has been going on for a long time. Yeah,
it's not even like that we learned it. It's just kind of what we are, and who we are. And I think there is a very much ingrained altruism in our species, as there are in many others. I think we like to think that we're just purely selfish, the selfish gene. We just want to, we're out for ourselves. But I think there really is a lot of altruism throughout all species, to an extent, right? We see it, selfless behavior, doing acts that would, put one at risk. Like, I know that, in herds, sometimes if a herd of antelope is being, chased by a lion or, lioness, really, let's be real, it's the females that do the hunting. Male lions are just lazy and fucking each other. But anyway, so there'll be, that's a whole nother story. But yeah, so, you can maybe see a herd being chased, and one will kind of, do some sort of behavior, or kind of like, look at me, that will put itself in danger, but kind of let the herd get away a little bit. Right. You see that sort of behavior, or all turning and then charging at the lion and being like, oh, you want a piece of this, so you can see behavior that, again, you would maybe relate to, oh, that's so human-like, and maybe is an example of altruism or empathy. I do think humans are unique in the fact that we have this elevated sense of empathy and altruism, right? We will share food, we will feed each other, we will take care of each other. But, I think that to say that it's only us that has, the kindness and the empathy, I think is being very short-sighted and pretty darn species-centric. As far as morality and sex, I do think that it's really interesting that humans, and to be clear, there's so many different ways to do human, right? Like there's so many different humans, there's so many different groups, and the environment and our culture very much shapes who we are. So like we're very much we're a biological species, right? And we're very much a cultural species, and the environment shapes a lot of our culture. So it's all connected, right? And so I think there's a lot of way to do this whole human animal experience. But it is interesting that we put this sort of morality or value on sex. I remember the first time I saw a spider monkey, first time I did any sort of preliminary spider monkey field work, the first time I ever really saw spider monkeys in the field, it was actually a spider monkey threesome. It was one male going back and forth between two females throughout the day. It was 3 different copulations. Spider monkeys have very long copulations. I think each one was roughly 25 minutes. Just to give you a comparison, human copulations on average are about 3 minutes. I know that you might be like, wait a minute, I'm much, but like long. I know, I'm talking on average. On average, this is not about you. I swear.
No, I'm not. I'm teasing.
But yeah, like the spider monkeys have these very long copulations, but it was hilarious because I remember watching, and they would have, like, the female would have their kids like hanging on them while they're getting boned, and you're just like, you know what I mean? And it's just this interesting, there's no shame, there's no judgment that I know of. Again, I don't speak spider monkey. They could have been like, Mary, that harlot, but for the most part, it is what it is. And we see promiscuity throughout the animal kingdom, and especially non-human primates. You see it in bonobos, you see it in chimpanzees, spider monkeys. You see it in the mouse lemur in Madagascar. They have to make up, and because they have such high amounts of promiscuity, the males have very large testicles because they have a lot of male-male competition. And usually, funny enough, testicle size, ball size, it corresponds with the amount of promiscuity. If there's a lot of male-male competition, they'll have bigger cojones. Like bonobo males have bigger cojones than chimpanzee males do, and it's just a kind of a bit of a free-for-all. So it's really interesting that we put this sort of shame or moral spin on sex, where a lot of the animal world, in fact, the southern right whale has the biggest DNA satchels in the world, the biggest balls. Each one weighs 1,100 pounds, 2,200 pounds of silos of seed in there, and they're inside, right? Because it's a whale. Imagine if those were, truck nuts, they would just be massive danglers. Talk about the submarine was taken out by his
I know
balls. But yeah, they have these giant testicles inside their body. They even have it's called rete mirabile. It's a network of veins and arteries that act like an AC unit to keep them nice and cool because they can overheat. But one of the reasons they have such giant, bean bags is the female southern right whale is highly promiscuous, and they'll mate with 7 males in one night, or sitting or season. It depends on how many are around. It's a pretty big oceans out there to find each other. But yeah, so they have that is a way to kind of make up for the male competition, is having very high quality sperm in some cases, and also giant man sex.
It's so complex and yet interesting for me to think about how this is getting down into the anatomy, like how these bonobo males end up with the biggest cojones in competition with other males. Like, what caused that natural selection to take place? Was there constant competitiveness in the cultural environment with the species they're trying to mate with, and therefore there was a natural inclination within their own bio makeup that made them start making the testosterone more produced, because more testosterone, typically bigger cojones, it seems, because that's where it's stored for the most part. Like, what do you think? How would someone who's trying to explain that scientifically?
So the cool thing about bonobos is it's not like that. They're competitive, but it's more about, it's not a violent competition. Okay. Like, so with bonobos, they are So chimpanzees and bonobos are our closest genetic relatives, right? Like I mentioned, and they about 6 million years ago, we split off. 2 million years ago, they split, and they have two very different ways to deal with tension, right? So chimpanzees, they fight it out. Bonobos, they like to bone it out. And because of that, and like and not just that, but the females, because they run the show, they're female dominant, they get to kind of, it's not necessarily always ladies' choice, but like the males will have, pretty, it's actually kind of flipped a little bit. I interviewed Dr. Amy Parrish, who's a wonderful bonobo expert and was the first person that published that bonobos were female dominant. But she said that in chimpanzees, a lot of times males will give females with sexual swellings, meaning they're receptive, they'll give them pieces of fruit in order to kind of, it's kind of like, hey babe, happy Valentine's Day, here's a necklace, let's do it. They'll give pieces of fruit to females that are receptive. In bonobos, she said that oftentimes the males will try to get pieces of fruit by giving sex, you know what I mean, from the females, because oftentimes, the females are again running the show. And so it's a little flipped, right? Like the gender roles, which there aren't strict gender roles in non-human primates the same way that we see, that we can tell, right? Because again, we don't all, but you don't see like, a female spider monkey getting chastised because, she had the audacity to pick a piece of fruit and not, herself, right? And didn't let a male do it and give it to her, right? There's not like the strict roles that we see in our own species that are enforced in some cultures. But so it's really interesting that in bonobos, the females kind of, do run the show, and oftentimes they'll prefer to have sex with, she said that she sometimes sees them prefer to have sex with other females because there's a more of a guarantee of them getting their rocks off, because they, are doing the GG rubbing, which they do, from what they observe, reach orgasm, and not necessarily from just straight penetration, which, can be enjoyable, but not the same. And, but they also, a lot of bonobos will have, they're like I said, they are kind of like the Kama Sutra of the primates. They're called pan-peniscus. That is their name, but I joke they should be pan-promiscuous because that is how they do. And they'll do a lot of face-to-face love making. So there's a lot of eye contact with them. But yeah, so the males are competitive, but not violently so, right? So it's not necessarily like a competition, like, oh, I'm gonna get you, but more just like, their biology is competing, not necessarily the dudes themselves. It's kind of interesting, right? It's not like they're, it's like don't worry, I don't have to get brutal with you. My sperm is going to outcompete yours, because they also, by the way, chimpanzees have very high quality, and bonobos have very high quality sperm compared to humans. Human sperm has degraded over time. It's getting actually worse. I know that there have been studies recently about pesticides and its effect on sperm, and it's really affecting sperm counts. So, and also the quality is just not the best with our species. So that's something to consider. But yeah, so it's not necessarily like they're to be crass, their balls got bigger because they're fighting more. It's just a response to probably the high amounts of sexual activity. Because like even with the southern right whale, they're not fighting necessarily for these females. They're not the whales. They're kind of almost not, I guess they're kind of patiently waiting in line. I know that echidnas, which are a monotreme, they're egg-laying mammals, they're fascinating. Males have a four-headed baloney pony. I'm not even kidding. I made a video about it. If you want to Google something slightly terrifying, Google echidna penis, because does have four heads. Apparently they only use two of them at a time, or choose between two. And but the males will actually form a small line waiting to copulate with the female, and they don't fight. So, but it's just interesting, like that they might have competition in the fact that they're multiple sex partners, but it's not the competition you're thinking about. It's the competition down there where the sperm is competing inside, So it's
this whole thing, I love this. I love learning this because it puts, first of all, it takes us off our high horse and it makes us come back down to the animal kingdom for a moment and realize like, hey, it's happening with us right now as we speak. We're so blind and not seeing in the mirror. But two, I watched a video and it was one of those like documentary channel or National Geographic. I can't remember what kind of monkey it was. And it was, you had like, I think they were gorillas. It may have been a different type of monkey. I can't remember exactly what kind of hominid species or what kind of monkey, I'll just say it was.
We'll figure it out. You tell me and I'll try to figure it out. I like this game.
It's definitely, the man was like the head honcho, and then his wife or woman, we'll call wife, that's so anachronistic and cute. But like his partner that is like had children by him and is now sneaking off with his brother. He pounds her, and then the next thing he knows, he's rushing after. Oh, I dropped my phone. Sorry.
Okay.
He's rushing after, I think her or him. I can't remember, but you could tell he's not happy with what just happened. And so maybe it was like, first of all, this is disrespectful. I'm the leader. You're not supposed to. I don't know if this, like, what
that does happen.
It seems like that was a moral no in that group.
Yeah, there are examples. I mean, so usually with it could have been a gorilla. It could have been. I mean, there's so many. Honestly, so many primates. It could have been a macaque. I mean, the macaques are more of a promiscuous horde, if you will, but there are hierarchies of males, in usually in most old world primate groups there are, and by old world primates I mean males, Africa and Asia. We're moving away from terms like old world and new world because they're just sort of steeped in colonialism, but Cercopithecine and Platyrrhine don't really roll off the tongue so easy. But anyways, there's a lot of a strict hierarchy of males in the old world monkeys. You see it in baboons, you see it in macaques. And you see, with great apes, you see, a gorilla, maybe one male, possibly a subadult, another male with a group of females, but usually it's one male that has access to her. And if the other one tries to sneak a copulation, it doesn't go so well. But in macaques, I know that females sometimes will sneak copulations with not the alpha male, but they have to be very sneaky about it because they don't want to get caught. They don't want to get, their ass handed to them. Chimpanzees, same too, like there's been great documentaries that have come out with Chimp Empire and other, just really well done documentaries about non-human primate behavior where you see females kind of sneaking off with maybe a male that's not, at the top of his game, right? And so and there could be a benefit for females for sure. And this is one of the things in an anthropology class years ago, and he was a cultural anthropology professor, but he was talking about so he was kind of stepping out of line, out of his lane. And he basically said, it makes sense for females to only, be with one male. It makes sense for males to be with a lot of females. And I was like, nope. Because if you think about it this way, if a female, especially, in a non-human primate in an environment where they have to take care of their offspring. So like, for instance, if I lived in an environment where it's like I have a nuclear family and I know I have a husband, or a partner that's going to take care of my kids, it would behoove me to just have him if I know he's solid and good. But if I'm a non-human primate female or even a human primate female that knows that it's just going to be on me, and I don't know the quality of this guy's sperm or that guy's sperm or that guy's sperm, it would make sense for me to kind of get around to all the dudes and have babies by different dudes, because who knows, this guy could all have, just be junk, right? So it's not necessarily the good thing to put all your eggs in one basket, literally and figuratively. So in some cases,
I'm sorry if I may press on that, just because something came to mind. Like, you're not saying, we don't know for sure because we can't speak the language if they are communicating somehow. We're not saying in this case that this chimpanzee, let's say, for example, actually is thinking about whose sperm is quality to produce a child, but maybe in the social sense, they might be thinking, hey, I've observed enough children being born, enough of this stuff going on to know that I need to be picking multiple in case one of them is faithful and loves me back or decides they want to.
I think it's a mix. I don't think they're thinking like that necessarily. I think that might be like the evolutionary benefit or the biological benefit. But what they might be thinking more is, I want to be on the good side of multiple males in this group, right? Because this alpha who's a total jerk that wants to kind of maintain, or they just prefer this other male that they're having a copulation with. But there is a benefit to forming these sexual
alliances, almost
kind of like so baboons, females will actually, it was Barbara Smuts, which is a great last name. She's also a great anthropologist, amazing. And she was Amy Parrish's, Amy Parrish, who studied bonobos, it was her academic mom. So like in academia, we have like not a hierarchy, but we have like the genealogy. I think Yeah. So her academic advisor or mom, and then her academic grandmother is Sarah Hurdy, who also has another really cool study I'll tell you about in a minute. But Barbara Smuts looked at baboon females who befriended male baboons. So when you actually have male-female friendships in baboons, which aren't necessarily sexual, but they become friends with them, and that adds and serves as added protection against other males. Like, for instance, if another mean male is trying to get all kind of bossy with them, they have this male who they're buddies with. But she also found that being in the friend zone in baboons also means you can get upgraded to the fuck zone over time. So like there is a benefit to behaving, like befriending one another, where there is the added protection, but it is a little bit of a transaction, right? And even though like maybe over time that she wants to, and she gets to the point where she's like, you know what, I really should give Steve a shot. He's been nice to me. But like there is this sort of assumption that like, why would males and females be friends with each other? It's like there is a mutual benefit there. But an interesting thing that I'll bring up from Amy Parrish, who studied bonobos, her great academic grandmother. I love this. I love that it's such a strong matriline of academics. It's Sarah Hurdy, Barbara Smuts, and Dr. Amy Parrish. And Sarah Hurdy looked at, she studied a lot of really cool topics in anthropology, but one of them was looking at concealed ovulation, and that there were a couple different theories about why human women, you can't tell when we're ovulating unless you really know your partner. It's hard to tell because our closest genetic relatives, chimpanzees and bonobos, you can definitely tell. People talk about monkey butts, and if they're talking about a chimp or a bonobo, that's not their butt. That's their very swollen vagine, their vulva, right? Yeah. You don't get that with humans. And so there's a couple of theories of why that is. One is that the more feminist critique is that it's this many fathers theory, that if you don't know who your kid is, you're going to be nice to all the kids, right? So like, for instance, if I'm having sex with Tom, Dick, and Harry, and none of them know if I'm ovulating, so none of them know which kid, if any of them are theirs, they're going to be nice to all of them, right? It's just, right. They're not going to, kill my children. There's going to cut down infanticide. It's going to cut down on them just being jerks. There's a less feminist critique, is that this concealed ovulation promotes monogamy because you want to nail down your woman and make sure that she doesn't have any sort of copulations with other dudes during her time. But the problem with that is it doesn't really I think it strips away the female agency, but also there are so many human groups throughout the world that aren't monogamous, right? And, a big chunk of the population isn't monogamous. So that really kind of doesn't make the most sense. But anyway, so that's kind of fascinating as well. There's a lot of neat anthro stuff that I like.
I just think it's really interesting. Asking that whole morality question and going into the animal kingdom that we just did to help people see all of these attributes and aspects you discussed show up in your Bible. I mean, you've got guys who supposedly have all these wives, and then there are slaves and they become their wives too to have children with. And like, it's the very book in which the ones who are arguing these cases, whether it be Islam, Judaism, Christianity, typically Abrahamic, but nonetheless, there are other examples of religions that do this. But they're saying, my book says, and this is the law, and yada, yada, yada. And it's like, these are things that we see animals already do too. And in many ways, there's overlap and common morality that we find that has been going on for who knows how millions of years, at least in the primates, our ancestral primates, like most maybe likely. Beyond that.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's fascinating because I think that humans, we want to believe, and I understand why. We want to believe we're special. We're special. Right. We're the chosen, we're God's chosen children, but let's be real. Like, we're just another species. We're just another animal. We're a very special animal, but we also, all the things that we say that, I don't know, we like to think that animals learned it from us, and it's very much the opposite. I think, I think and we didn't necessarily learn it. It's just like we evolved alongside these species, and it's just, we share common ancestors with them. So, and a lot of our behavior is we have to remember is shaped by our environment and our culture. And at any point we can, and the cool thing about cultural evolution and this whole point that things are shaped by our cultural evolution happens a lot faster than biological evolution. So if there's something we really don't like, and that's like why, things like trans rights and gay rights and just kind of seeing leaps and bounds and the frustration I feel like with civil rights is you can't be complacent for 1 second, because then it's like 2 steps back. You got to just kind of keep at it nonstop, fighting back. But that evolution can happen a lot faster than biological evolution. So, a lot of that, if we don't like what we see or how we feel in our culture and our society, we can work to change it. Yeah. And so I think that's gives me a lot of hope too, when we see because I do like to point out, I pointed out earlier that, we're 99.9% the same genetically, right? I like to point out that in our animal kingdom, there's over 1,500 species that have been documented engaging in homosexual behavior, right? And there's only one species that has been documented engaging in homophobic behavior. And ironically, that species is in the genus Homo. I like to point out, but it's humans, right? And it's ridiculous. And I like to think that we're growing, but I also know that it's a constant fight. You can't look at women's reproductive rights. If we let our guard down 5 seconds, we stand to lose.
Huge chunks of freedom. Yeah. This is a powerful point. You're bringing up a very interesting point. I've actually had a debate discussion with someone who wanted to argue against homosexuality or the same-sex relationships. And I know that term, some people get offended by the way that you say it, but I don't mean it that way. But the people arguing with me were trying to use, again, look at all the harm, look at all the disease that comes from this particular practice. And my response was, maybe you can help me and defend what I'm saying. I said, look at how much same-sex disease. And then they go, but but that's why you're supposed to marry a specific girl, and she's a virgin, and then she doesn't have all of these diseases, and then you're saving yourself. Like, if we do this way, this is going to save us from diseases and passing around all these things and all the harm that can come from that. Therefore, religion is good in this respect. What are your thoughts about that? I mean,
so there's enough zoonotic diseases that don't involve sexual activity, first of all, just to be very clear. I mean, COVID is one of them. I mean, that we look at, that's a zoonotic disease that came from another species. And we have this thing called viral spillover. But yeah, I mean, and that has nothing to do with having, obviously if you're having, I remember there was one of the bits of advice that I think New York gave about sex during the early days of COVID was do it through a wall or a sheet. It was like the Amish. It made me laugh.
I heard that too.
Oh my God. Yeah. But, yes, there's something to be said for disease transmission and, higher rates of that if in promiscuity, right? But promiscuity can go multiple different ways, right? It's going to keep happening. We have options in place to kind of cut down disease that, let's be real, straight men, just as bad as non-straight men, don't like to use these sorts of
contraceptive
prophylactics to help, you know what I mean? And also there's a lot of people on the down low that are not living their life the way they want, and so they're doing it on the down low, and then they're bringing that back into a heterosexual relationship. So if we all were out in the open, perhaps we would have a cut down in that as well, because people would just be doing their own thing. But I think the gay community, especially, I grew up in Los Angeles, and I mean, the way the AIDS epidemic was treated was so absolutely terrible. People were completely ignored, and we've had other sexually transmitted diseases become huge problems in the past, none quite like HIV, and for people to just call it, not help or not try to get funding or do the research because they thought it was just, the homosexuals that were getting it were absolutely, wrong and mistaken. I mean, there was plenty of people that were getting it that were not in that community. And even so, it's highly hypocritical if that is one's reasoning for why it shouldn't happen, when you're a Christian that says you're supposed to love thy neighbor and also take care of, you're sick and dying, right? So because it also is affecting everybody, the whole population was getting affected by HIV and AIDS. The way a disease begins and the way the disease begins, I don't think is the way that it should be treated the whole entire duration. And even if it was, like, what does it matter? Because it's affecting everybody.
Something came to mind while you were saying that about a response to someone who's trying to make a moral argument there, and that is, well, actually, if we really want to be the most moral, we should just stop having sex completely. You'll remove any possibility of transmission through sexual disease. And guess what? In antiquity, I wonder how many women died in giving birth. Well,
it's so dangerous.
We might as well stop giving birth, right? Because
it's so dangerous.
That's morally not right. Right?
Yeah. I talk about that with abortion. Yeah, like those that argue that abortion is dangerous, and the rates for child, especially with women of color in America, it is disgusting. I think they're 3 times more likely to die in childbirth than their white counterparts. It's disgusting, and a lot of it is because medical professionals don't listen to Black and brown communities about their pain, and they're actually, for years, doctors were taught, and there's still a high degree, I don't know what the actual percentage is, of doctors that think that Black skin is thicker than white skin and does not feel pain the same, which is such pseudoscience and such BS. So there was a great mistrust in medicine from those of marginalized populations for very good reasons, right? Like, I wouldn't want to go to a doctor if I was told that my skin was thicker and that my pain was not the same, even though it 100% we know is the same. So again, childbirth can be very dangerous. Even now, we know that, especially in the United States compared to other developed nations, it's one of the highest childbirth mortality rates in the world for developed nations. Yeah.
Wow.
It's bad. It's really bad. So yeah, it's not good. I'm trying to think of, hold on, my brain. I've been on a monkey evolution sex train. This was great. This was fantastic. So I'm like, I have more arguments in my back pocket. And I'm like, where are they? Where'd you go?
Yeah. She has a whole cache, I guarantee.
I have a whole cache. No, I do joke. I'm working on a bit right now because I think it's ridiculous that we put such value on body counts and things like that. Because I just joke that, like, what's the difference between a friend and a lover? Like, what's the difference? You do sex.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So,
right.
So it's just, body count is just your job experience. It's just and like it's just some rigorous testing. You're just doing some research.
That's a good point, though.
But it's just, I think it's so silly when people, I want people, but more than anything, I want people to be safe, right? So, you know what to do. So,
I mean, it's
wrap it up.
If you think about it, even like food, I mean, like where do you draw this line of what are you eating? Did you cook it enough? Like, there's so much normal stuff that they probably wouldn't say is immoral, and that you're risking. There's so many risks and issues that come up, and it's like, at some point, you if you're thinking through it and you're not built based on your bias from being religious your whole life or something, you're going to realize that doesn't, like, peanut allergic, where did this allergy come from? Is this a moral thing? Did someone do something wrong? Like, it's just silly to start drawing those lines. And it always ends up in sex a lot of times. That's why I brought it up, because this is a topic you're obviously very educated on.
Yeah. And I think, look, one of my favorite moments in the past, like, I don't know, it was 4 years ago. It was right before COVID, 2019. My friend, who's a dear friend, we hosted a Bigfoot television show together with Dean Cain in 2013 called $10 Million Bigfoot Bounty. But his name's Dr. Todd Dizitel, and he, what class was it? I think it was emerging diseases. He was teaching a class on emerging disease at NYU, and he had to miss a class. So he had me sub to teach about STIs. Which was a lot of fun, you know what I mean? But here I am. Yeah. And it was specifically like, about STIs and talking about, I talked about antibiotic resistant gonorrhea, and, we talked about syphilis and things that actually, syphilis was deadly and, drove people crazy back in the day, So it's, there's something to be said for wanting to be safe, but at the end of the day, there was a time when the common cold could kill you, So it's to sit here and say that people should just stop having sex or only have sex with one person for the rest of their lives, to completely, perhaps not ruin, but decrease limit the pleasure they have in life, or, a life well lived, because they're like, oh, well, I have to do this because if I don't, then I'm going to go to hell. And it's just, yeah, to put that sort of morality on it, I always thought was so funny. I thought that was just such a strange thing to do, compared to so many other things. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I feel it's again, like we were talking about with religion in terms of trying to, I don't even know if we did this during the recording or when we were
Yeah, yeah.
about religion being kind of a thing to keep people in line, right?
Right. Right.
So if you tell people that if you masturbate, you're going to grow hair on your hands, or if you have sex, you're going to, get, I don't know, HIV and
Spill your
die.
seed on the earth. What about the spill your seed on the earth that little boys are always worried about? Don't do that.
Don't do that, Yeah. So again, it's a way to control. And with women, it's absolutely control. You know what I mean? Like calling them whores if they dare to be free with their sexuality. Like, I know that I get a whole lot of hate for that, but I think that's absolutely ridiculous. Like, I don't know. I also don't believe or buy into this very strong, gender binary of like men can be this and women are like this. And I definitely don't think like men like sex more than women. I don't think that's the case whatsoever. And I don't think, men perform more partners than women do. I think there really is a spectrum. You know what I mean? Like there's some men that I know that are like, I don't want to have sex more than with like a couple people in my whole life. Like I'm fine with that. And I know women that are like, I want to have sex with the world, and that's fine. That's their prerogative, right? So there really is a spectrum of what people want, and that a lot of that is, something that is influenced by their environment, by their culture, by their family, by their upbringing, but by their biology, by their, hormone levels. We know that testosterone and estrogen are not male and female hormones. We both have them. Some have more testosterone. Like I might have more testosterone than a man does. They might have more estrogen than I do. It really does. It does vary. So that's biology for you.
Ladies and gentlemen, an act of God just occurred and a thunderclap and the power went out and now I can't get my blue lights back on, but you're still here. And so, Natalia, I think it's only respectful of your time and of course to have you come back for live streams and stuff because you were in the middle of something and I don't know if you even remember, but I want to allow you to give us, I guess, a recap or whatever you'd like to say as we wrap up this episode of sex, morality, evolution, and eventually we got to talk about Bigfoot.
Bigfoot's got to happen. No, I think, again, primate sex is really interesting. I love that there's so many different ways to do it. So, if you ever want to hear more about that, but yeah, they don't really put this sort of moral spin. I mean, sure, there's jealousy and, intrigue and things like that. But it was enough that it got, God so upset it had to knock your power right off. Right. Exactly.
He was done. He was done. He said,
okay, guys, we get it.
I'm done with this. You guys are committing all sorts of atrocities.
We didn't even talk about the penis bone. I mean, I didn't even get to the baculum. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. We haven't got, we're going to have to get to that at some point.
We'll talk about that with Bigfoot because I actually did a whole podcast about Bigfoot's boner because HuffPost Weird News needed it. And, I'm here to help. So, yeah. But yeah, I think evolution is one of those things that we can see it all around us. Like I said, with COVID and even the flu. Like that's why every year you have to get a flu shot because the flu has evolved. It has moved on to a different strain.
Right.
And it's fascinating. Right. I don't know. So.
Well, if you're watching this and you enjoyed, please go subscribe to Natalia's YouTube channel. You can also watch, she does short form content over on Instagram. She's on TikTok. And you also are doing all sorts of stuff. You got a website people can go to.
Yeah.
What else can people do to join you, support you? Is there anything else?
I have a Patreon if you're interested, but even more exciting, I am hosting a trip to Madagascar in May. So if you want to go on like a bucket list trip that's going to blow your mind, I am leading a 9-day trip to Madagascar. It's 4 different cities, 3 different major lemur hotspots. We're going to go to Ranamafana National Park, home to over 12 species of lemur, fossa, the Ai, if you're familiar, and we're going to go to Anja Community Reserve with ring-tailed lemurs, those charismatic kookmeisters. They're the big dancers. Same with Shafox. And the last day will be at Lemurs Park, which is more of a sanctuary, and they get a little bit more hands-on, which I don't necessarily recommend because primates can be a little Wiley, but it's going to be such a good time. So check it out. You can, if you go to my link tree, which is, I believe, on my Instagram page, or if you just Google Madagascar Natalia Reagan, you can find it and sign up. I have coupons too, which but wait, there's more. I've got coupons. So yeah, it's going to be a great time. And I'll be lecturing a ton about lemur behavior, morphology, evolution, and highly recommend. The group that's going so far is awesome.
Awesome. I hope you check it out. Go sign up. We should plan a MythVision tour one day where we go and meet up, figure out something. Got to figure out something. But let her know in her comment section when you go to her YouTube channel or anywhere you find her links, which are in the description. Go subscribe, go follow, do all that. Let them know that, or let her know that YouTube MythVision sent you, that you're here because of this interview.
Oh, and I do stand-up comedy too. So if you're in the LA area, I do a lot of science comedy stand-up. So, in New York City. So, and if you want me to come to your town, just let me know. Just put it in the comments.
That's awesome. Okay. Please like this video. Comment down below what you learned today. I love just understanding more. I think also removes a guilt or a shame that we're taught and helps you learn a new thing, because you start realizing, whoa. Maybe we're wrong. Maybe we're going too far on certain things. And we're not saying monogamy is bad. We're not saying people who are heterosexual are bad. We're saying usually it's the people who are monogamous and who are heterosexual who are judging the rest and saying this is the way things go. And we're trying to break down that, break the stigma. Is that the right word?
Yeah. It's all. There's so many different ways to be a human. So just the more open you are about it, trust me, the more fun it's going to be, because variety is the spice of life. You don't have to indulge in it, but it's nice if other people can.
Thank you, Natalia, for everything. Any final words from you?
Oh, well, just keep evolving, because you really have no choice. And be good to each other. Be good to each other.
Thank you so much. And never forget, we are MythVision.